Hey, Margie here. As a physical therapist, I know firsthand how absolutely essential good posture is when it comes to your bones, your energy level, your overall health and well being. And so today, what I wanted to do is discuss both posture and ergonomics, how we set up our workplace, and give you some tips that you can put into your life to really make a big difference. And how I'm going to do that is that I've asked my husband, Dr. Craig Bissinger, to come on and interview me, and we'll have a discussion about this because it's also something near and dear to his heart. So, lots of good tips. Stay tuned. Welcome, Craig, and thank you so much for joining me here today.
It's a pleasure to spend time with you. This is probably about the only time I see you these days. You're so busy doing stuff. But nevertheless, yes, this is a very important topic and one that's really dear to my heart in so many different respects. But I want to start off by at least addressing the idea of what are we talking about when we talk about posture, ergonomics, and osteoporosis. I mean, they're all interesting terms, but I would like you to explain to everyone why we're even discussing this topic and looking forward to hearing your answer.
It's an important topic for everyone. I really think in our society, people are just not aware of their posture. I mean, it's just something that most people don't even think about. However, when it comes to bone health, it's essential because the research has shown that forward bending and rounding posture actually increases the risk of spinal fractures because these fractures can occur in the front of the spine. And in the rounded position, when we're forward, we're putting more pressure on those areas that are already at risk in fractures. And so there was a study done years ago at Mayo Clinic showing that people who did rounding exercises, with forward bending increased their fracture risk. So the problem is so many of our postures are forward bending and people are in that sustained position for a long period of time, so it's going to increase their risk of fractures unnecessarily. That's one of the problems. The second problem is that when you're in a forward bent or rounded position, and that can cause an increase, it's called kyphosis in the middle back, the rounding, that hump that people don't like, the rounding of the middle back. Any increase in that, and with the head being forward, puts people off center. And they've actually done research on this showing that people are more prone to with an unsteady type of walk, their balance isn't as good, and therefore they're at increased risk of fall. So most people don't realize that poor posture can actually increase your risk of fall. So there's so many reasons, but it's just very important because we want to reduce our risk of fractures, we want to reduce our risk of falls, plus we don't want to be in pain. No one, we want to feel good and have energy. And when we're in that rounded posture, even just our, first of all, we're losing the ability of our lungs to expand. So we have decreased oxygen because we're not, we're compressed here. The other thing is that our shoulder, when it's rounded, when we're forward, we can't even lift full. So it puts us in impingement position. So we can have shoulder injuries. So it goes on and on, but it's not difficult. There's easy tweaks I know we're going to talk about today that people can do and can make such a big difference. And you feel so much better. You're not tired and fatigued at the end of the day. When you're in poor posture all day, your muscles just get so tired that you just want to like collapse and lay down. And that's not what we want.
So when you're talking about all these different areas, could we give like a common example of a situation what you're referring to that will lead us to that rounded posture on a regular basis?
I think the biggest one is sitting. People, unfortunately, we're a very sedentary society, especially since so many people are on their computers for just, a lot, me included, during the day. And what happens when we sit and we sit with our back rounded, and everybody could try that. If you're in a sitting position, what I want you to do is just round out your low back. So just sort of round it out and see what happens. Everything falls apart. Your shoulders come forward, your head comes forward. When your back is rounded, we're not meant to sit. Our back is not meant to be rounded like that. And it's just that's that slouch, relaxed position because we all have an inward curve in our low back and we're meant to maintain that curve. What happens when we overstretch it by rounding is that our muscles, which are meant to support us, become overstretched and weak. And so, as well as it puts us in that position that we don't want to be in. So that's one of the main things to try to maintain that inward curve in your low back during activities. But sitting, I would say, is the biggest problem because and you can, don't have a problem relaxing your muscles, but do it in support if you're going to, not, don't just like collapse and have everything rounded. Like those chairs, those office chairs that are cushy, mushy, those don't help anybody.
So when we're talking about sitting in chairs and I think computers are involved in that too, you were mentioning something about ergonomics involved in this process of with posture. So can you kind of at least educate some of us a little bit more about what you mean by ergonomics and how that ties in with the posture?
Sure. Ergonomics is really blending the worker to the workplace. And so there's two parts to that. I think it's critical that people understand the basic concepts, the basic concept of not slouching when you're sitting. But also, there's ways that you can arrange your workstation, the workplace, and there are ways you can put your computer and different things during the day so that you don't put yourself in those awkward positions. So it's really the combination. It's understanding. I think the more important thing is for the person to understand the principles. And, but equally as important, if you're in a situation where, the computer is in a position that it's almost impossible to maintain a good posture, then you need to change the equipment and the position. So but the good news is there's really a lot of easy things people can do that they just don't think about.
Well, can you give me like an example if I'm working at my computer? I mean, a lot of us are now working from home. I unfortunately deliver babies, so it's hard to deliver them when I'm home. I can't do it on the internet, but can you explain a little bit more about like a setup or things that you might see when you deal with a client or on these issues?
Yes, and I've been giving numerous ergonomics classes to all sorts of people, and I have everybody send in their workstations, and I see the biggest problem I see is people use a laptop, and it's okay to use a laptop, but the problem is the basic laptop when if you're just using the laptop, you put it on your desk, it's too low because ideally your eye should be at the top of the print, so the top of the print should be at eye level or a little below if you wear bifocals or trifocals or even progressives. So, but if you're using the laptop, it's way down. It's way lower than where you should be. And in terms of the keyboard, also the keyboard ideal. So, what you can do with a laptop is you buy. Like I have a laptop right here, but I buy an extra keyboard and then you just buy a mouse. So you put your laptop on a stand, actually, it's not on that stand right now, but like you can buy a stand to put your laptop. I use a screen, but you can, elevate that. And then you have your keyboard and your mouse. So your arms, you want it just, your wrists, you want around 90 neutral, elbows around 90 degrees, so like at a right angle. And, so it's just a little bit under like 1 to 2 inches your desk ideally below where you're at, but you can do that if you take the keyboard, the mouse, and just have a setup like that, you're golden. Versus when you're just using the laptop, it's it is impossible to really have a good position. Now, saying that the body is okay for short periods of time. You're not, it's not going to be, if you're on an airplane and you're using your laptop, you do the best you can with your posture. It's just when you're doing something all day long, hours by hours, it can really make a big difference. So I think the laptop is a big issue. Another big issue is, or a great thing that people can do, the problem is being in one position for a long period of time. The solution, which I think is amazing, is the sit to stand desk. I think it's changed everything for people because you don't have to be sitting for extended periods of time. You can move it up and down and change your position. And it takes so much pressure off of your low back, your shoulders. As I said, the body doesn't like to be in one position for a period of time. So So I'm a huge believer in the sit to stand desk. And, even just doing, there's like a, for every 20 to 30 minutes taking a break. And then like every 8 minutes, maybe for every 20 minutes you're sitting, you can stand for 8 minutes and just for 2 minutes move around a little bit. That's like, one rule that people have used that seems to be helpful. But I always say, do what works for you. If you start getting tired, then you sit, you can stand. So just mixing it up makes a big difference.
Interesting. And so you're talking about you can fatigue yourself basically if you sit too long in a bad position.
Yeah, the problem is we're not meant to be in one position. And so when you're sitting in one position, the muscles aren't moving. Ideally, the blood comes, how the body works, the muscle contracts and then the blood circulates and then the waste products release. But when you're sitting, especially if you're tense and you're sitting in one position, nothing's moving. So you're not getting that nice blood flowing to the area and it's sort of tight, and then the waste products sit there, so people get knots and other things. So, yeah, that's what happens when people are in one position, they're not moving, they start getting fatigued, and, by the end of the day, they're just so exhausted unnecessarily.
I actually kind of remember when we first started going out that you were commenting about how I held my head in my face. And then I look back at pictures of me in ninth grade, my ID from ninth grade, and I basically the first thing you see is my Adam's apple like this. And I was like this forever. And over the course of time, you whipped me into shape. And I had to sit up straight. And she basically threatened me if I had back problems and I didn't sit up straight, she would help me. So well, it's true, but that's okay. And honestly, I preach that in my practice. Patients come in, they're sitting there for exams or conversations, and I'm seeing these slouch postures, and I cannot keep my mouth quiet because I know better. And we start into conversations about their posture and how they sit and how they do things. And so what you're talking about really hits home for me. And it starts at a lot younger age for me because I'm taking care of patients who have babies. And after they have their babies, their posture always goes down because they're curling up, holding babies, they're bending over, doing all kinds of terrible stuff. And that posture probably was partially learned, but now it's reinforced as you get in that age. What do you think we should be doing to kind of move away from this mistake in the paradigm and move forward?
It really starts with our kids. It's so funny when we were in Japan many, many, many years ago, and I'm staring at the bus stop like, "What's going on here?" Because there were 80-year-olds and they were squatting, and that's what they've learned to do. That's just their culture. They squat, they do things. Where in our culture, we immediately kids throw them. If you watch kids bend, that's how we're meant to bend. We're meant to squat. We're meant to bend like that, and we throw them into chairs. And so, and that's where it all begins. So I think it starts with at all ages, but it's never too late. It's never too late. So I'll give everybody a little lesson. So what I want you to do right now in terms of the sitting, is that okay if I give a little lesson here? Okay. So what you can do, and also let me just tell you, in the show notes, I have a handout that I created. It's a mini course, Improve Your Bone Health Naturally. But at the last, there's a couple parts to it. The last part is all about improve your posture. And there's videos there where I actually show exercises that you can do for your head, your shoulders, your low back, and how to sit. So I go into that in really in good detail that people can really learn what to do. But for right now, what I want people to do is just sort of see. First of all, we talked about, is your low back rounded? The other thing, a lot of people cross their legs, and cross your legs, everybody, when you're sitting right now and see what happens to your low back. Can you see what happens to that, Craig? Yeah. Do you
I'm
see what happens? Does it round or does it arch?
I can't sit up. It's
Yeah, it rounds, exactly.
around.
But ideally, we're meant to sit with our feet apart. But I want everybody for a minute to just take their hands, just for a minute, and sit on them. And there's two bones you'll feel. They're called your sit bones. And you should be sitting directly on them. But if you round out your pelvis, like bring it forward, if you slouch, You see they go forward, and if you overarch, they go back. So ideally, you wanna sit on take your hands away. You wanna sit on those bones. But what you can do, you can a good exercise is you pretend you're sitting on a clock. So the 12 o'clock is right in front and the 6 is right in back. And you just bring your pelvis like forward and back. Pretend you close your eyes and you pretend you're sitting on that clock, moving from 12 to 6. And then you do it in slower and slower increments, smaller and smaller increments until you stop. And a lot of times that's like a good position that if I were to push on your shoulders, you would not collapse. So that's just a good way to see where you're at. You want to maintain the inward curve. And for some people, they don't have the strength. So you can take a towel and roll it up. And I show this in the video, but you can take a towel roll it up, or buy a lumbar support, and you put it right in your low back. So that sort of, so it supports you. So you really can't, you can't round out. And that's good if you're sitting with a chair that has a back and you're being supported. But otherwise, you can learn how to sit so that you're not rounded out and that you're maintaining length in your back. But as I said, I go into this in more detail in those videos. But I just think be aware. The first step is be aware. Are you sitting slouched? And what I also have found is that as a physical therapist, I've been teaching this, oh gosh, over 40 years actually. But what but yeah. But what I found is that when just telling someone, "Oh, where's your head or where are your shoulders?" We're too busy. People don't seem to it doesn't work. So what does work though is if you give people a few exercises like the ones I'm giving with the head and the shoulders and to do throughout the day. So maybe 3 to 5 repetitions, 3 to 5 times a day. It just gives a reminder to the muscles, "Oh, yeah, I'm not supposed to be here." So it really, really works. And these exercises, the same ones I have in the handout, I created for the state of New Jersey. So there's thousands of different exercise programs that we have in the state of New Jersey that are free. And these exercises are part of it. And I've been amazed how so many people of all ages have been able to improve their posture. I mean, there's thousands of people doing them, and it's really made a big difference.
So, not all of my patients have a desk job, Margie. And some of those patients are actually doing more physical activities, even in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and even up to their 70s. So, more specifically, if somebody's maybe doing some repetitive work or, lifting or bending or, working in a clothing store or working at a cashier or something like that, what kind of ideas could you give them to help them survive each of these days?
Okay, I think in general for everybody, and also especially, we don't want to be collapsed. So just visualizing that your head is either a helium balloon or it's attached to a helium balloon and your spine is lengthening. So you so you can even now there's between your pelvis and your last rib, you can put your fingers there. And you want to maintain that length as well. And that's a good way to sort of see, when people have lost height, they can see how many fingers they have in there. But when we think about ourselves being lengthened during the day, that visualization is really, really helpful. But the other thing is people bend from the waist. People go to bend over and they collapse because they're bending from the waist. We're meant to bend from the hips and the knees, like we're doing a squat. And so I think when we learn that, like hinging from the hip, so not collapsing at the waist, but hinging at the hip, just like you're doing a squat, is huge. It's going to make such a difference. And then the other thing that people really injure themselves, all ages, is when you're bending forward and twisting together. That's actually how you can injure your disc as well. So, for example, you're getting something out of the dishwasher, people bend forward and twist. So, what you want to do in that situation is you want to face what you're doing. You can use your feet to pivot, you can turn, but you definitely don't want that combination of bending forward and twisting. So, I think again, if you're bending forward, you want to do it safely. If you hinge from the hip, keeping your back straight, that's not going to be a problem. And then, when you just face the direction so that you're not doing the 2 together. So that's a biggie, yeah.
Now, I like to point out that we're 20 minutes into this interview, and I guess you mean that we should stand up and walk around a little bit right now.
Yeah, taking breaks is we can stand up.
All
It's
right.
absolutely essential, just taking breaks, taking some deep breaths. Yeah, the exercises, one of the exercises is just bringing your arms back and down. Yes, that's gonna make such a big difference. People get so busy with their work, they just don't care. But taking that little break is gonna make you feel better, you'll have more energy, and they found that when people do this, they're even more productive. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Now, I have another interesting question, which is very timely. Our society now, our older population seems to be getting much more active. They're doing exercise and activities and sports even as they get older. And there's a new craze in pickleball. Now, I understand a little bit about pickleball, and it kind of reminds me of tennis when you're playing the net. And I know that a lot of people in these games don't have great posture. So, can you give them some advice on how to negotiate even games and physical activities as we get older?
I think the same rules apply. I think, when you're standing at the net with tennis or whatever, you don't need to be rounded. You can sit, you can stand and be in a good position. Where are you? Where's your head? I think the main thing is that rounding and bending. So I think when you learn to bend from the hips, keeping your spine lengthened, I think that can, translate to all activities. And with osteoporosis, another thing though that people just a daily activity, like gardening now is a big
Mhm.
deal. And the same principles you apply to gardening. You don't want to round out. You may need to have a bench. You need to squat or be on one knee and kneel. It's so easy for people just to sort of bend down, round out, and pick weeds and do things and not really worry about their positioning. But yet, it's just cumulative over time. You certainly don't want to injure yourself or have a fracture because you just didn't realize that you could hurt yourself. So
And
pickleball, yeah. So any of the sports, I think just utilize. And I think the big thing with these racket sports and everything is not to take that crazy shot that you could fall. It's just not worth it. Yes, you might be a competitive person, but if there's some crazy shot that you have to go all the way across the court or whatever it is, it's just not worth it. I think practice and just try to be in as good posture and positioning as you can.
when we talk about posture and working out and doing things, I think about a lot of our patients are tend to go and do walking as an example. And I know you and I would drive down the street sometimes, and I look at somebody and said, "We should stop and you should talk to them about how they're walking." Do you want to tell them what we're looking at and what they should do differently?
I think the biggest problem is that people, are rounded, but usually a lot of times with hills, when you're going on a hill or an incline, it tends to make you round a little bit if you're not paying attention. So I think the same concept of, lengthening your spine and just making sure your muscles posture should be comfortable, natural, not tense. And so just being relaxed and just being able to again, I'm into quick walking and getting the exercise, but in a relaxed way and in a balanced way and in an even way. And so I think sometimes, and a lot of people ask me this question all the time, and I have a different opinion than a lot of people. But a lot of people, like to hold hand weights and really while they walk, and I personally don't like that because I think it changes the walk. It tenses, and I also believe in stress reduction and happiness, and that plays a huge role in recovery and keeping yourself, your cortisol levels down and how important that is for your bones. So part of the walk is also absorbing nature and just enjoying it. But when you're holding the weights, it tightens everything up. So I prefer not to use the weights. I think it affects the mechanics of the walk and then just, do weight training a separate time.
Okay. And what about weight training? Since you're just mentioning that, can you talk about posture and how important that is and what you need to do when you talk about weights?
Absolutely. It's essential. And I sometimes when I go to the health club and I'm in the gym, I just want to walk around and say, no, 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 because people are in a terrible posture. I'm such a big believer, and we all know that weight training and resistance training and exercises does improve bone density. And it's such a huge piece of any osteoporosis program. However, you need to be in a good posture. It's so important. If you are if you're not stabilized, and really, I think core stability is fine. But if you're in a bad posture and you're trying to lift, you're going to injure yourself and you're not going to get the benefit. So that's why I tell everybody, if they can, to first work with a physical therapist. If they do have osteoporosis, to see a physical therapist. They'll make sure you're doing everything properly, because the posture a great exercise program can be a disaster if you're not doing it in good posture, and it's really the basis. I really recommend doing posture exercises every single day, and then it becomes natural. What happens is when you start adapting these positions and these postures and start the awareness, because so often we're just disconnected from our bodies. We have no idea. When the awareness comes in and we start realizing, oh, yeah, that's when really everything changes. And, but I do think, again, too many people are not exercising with good posture, and it's a huge problem.
One thing I always remember about our conversations on this topic were when you were reviewing some of the exercise programs that wanted the state to say these are recommended for people who have osteopenia or osteoporosis. And you made comments that were really intriguing to me about some of the observations. And of course, that calls into question some of the exercises and the people who are teaching those classes. And can you make a comment on both those topics for me?
Oh, just in general. Yeah, in general, and I talked about this before, not most a lot of people don't know the exercise precautions of with osteoporosis.
Right.
And the biggest one is the forward bending and the rounding. And so there are a lot of senior exercise classes where they're touching their toes, they're doing the windmill, which is, forward bending and rotation, which really does increase your risk of fracture. So what we did, I volunteer on this Interagency Council of Osteoporosis for the state of New Jersey. So what we did is actually created a sheet that we sent to all the exercise instructors in the state of New Jersey on for people with osteoporosis, what they need to avoid. And it was a great initiative because too many people were getting fractures because, you know, the instructors didn't mean harm. They just didn't have the knowledge. And, in terms of there were numerous lectures I gave, and I would explain this, and then people would come up to me, "You are absolutely wrong. My yoga instructor says that that is not correct." And I love yoga and I love Pilates, but you need to take the precautions and use neutral postures and not do the rounding. And so I'd send articles to their instructors because but yes, so that's the thing. Even though someone's teaching it, unfortunately, you don't know that they've had the experience and had the training in osteoporosis.
Well, Margie, a text is coming in right now. Tell me we're almost done with this conversation. But since speaking of texting, what about texting?
Yes, that's a big one. I mean, here we go with the phone, right? So in the hand in the download that I have, I actually show this, but the problem is, sure, if you look at children now, unfortunately, they found the inward curve in their neck, which they're supposed to have, is flattened. So they've actually changed their anatomy because they've been in this position on the text. How sad is that? Okay, so a couple things. We don't want this, number 1. So 2 things, you can get a stand. What I always say, talk into it, you can talk into your text, and if it's not spelled perfect, who cares? So that's number 1. Number 2, you can make it like an exercise, bring your shoulder blades back and down, and then you can do, you can work on it, bring it up to your face, but you can work on it in a better posture, where it's and then afterwards, make sure, you bring your shoulder blades back and down, or you can just bring your shoulder blades back to work on the muscles while you're relaxing the neck. Um, but yes, and so and you can also get a stand, but I think, all day when you're rounded on that on the iPhone on the phone, it's terrible, the texting. And it's bringing your shoulders, also for your eyes. Your eyes aren't meant to look at that little screen. So, I'm a big believer in talking if you have to. You can get an iPad that's bigger too if you needed to, with even a keyboard, if texting is something that is important to you. But otherwise, make it an exercise, where you would just bring it up, and they have things also. I think I show that on the video where you can hold on to it. I don't text that much. So, but when you're doing the text, bring it up, bring your shoulder blades back and text in that position. And then, yeah, because that's a big one. I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people have issues.
And one more thing to mention is not walking in texting, especially if you don't want to fall and cause injuries.
That's such a good point because falls are our enemy. Nobody wants to fall. That's how we sustain fractures. And people just don't get it sometimes. And they're so busy texting, they just don't care. And boom, they fall. And that's, when you're not, look, your dad, he had a bad fall. Luckily, he was okay at the time, but it was because he wasn't paying attention. So that's the first thing whenever I give a talk on fall prevention is be mindful, be aware, of your it's so important. But I'm glad you brought up texting because that is something people do all day and puts them in just a terrible posture.
Well, I can tell you, I've learned a lot today, and I really appreciate your time. And I hope everyone has found our conversation to be good and interesting and informative about our bones and our health. So, Margie, would you like to say any final words?
No, just thank you and really take this seriously because first of all, you'll feel so much better and do, the videos. Can I give you credit, Craig? I will tell them Craig was the videographer for those videos that that I made. And I did them several years ago and they've helped so many people. I've gotten thousands really of thank yous in terms of those videos because and they're simple, but it's just making this a priority and it will help your bones. You'll feel better, you're less fatigue, more energy. So it's a win-win. So yes, and do download the sheet because it goes into, you'll be able to have those videos and go back to them and see the exercises that you can do throughout the day as well. So thank you so much, Craig, for taking the time to be here with me today.
Thank you. And thank everybody for coming and listening.
I hope you enjoyed this interview and now have some new tips you can put into your life in terms of posture and ergonomics. The link to the Improve Your Bone Health Naturally mini course, which has all the posture videos at the bottom, is in the show notes. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.